John Keats said, "The poetry of earth is never dead," and that, of course, is true. But of all the sounds made by creatures other than man, only those of the singing bird have ever seemed to him completely in accord with his own aesthetic sense, or, what is more important, expressive in any fashion that he could interpret in terms of his own emotions. For these reasons, man has often compared poets to birds and birds to poets. Christopher Marlowe, John Milton describes William Shakespeare himself as singing his native wood notes wild. Poets, in other words, sing like birds and birds like poets. Let us recall some of the birds praised by poets, and then listen to the songs of these birds. What better place to begin than with the opening lines of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Christabel? "'Tis the middle of the night by the castle clock, and the owls have awakened the crowing cock. To wit, to woo. And hark again, the crowing cock, how drowsily it crew." It is actually the hearer, and not the crowing cock, who is usually sleepy, for the bird of dawning, as Shakespeare calls him, is especially famous for early rising. The cock figures much in verse, as for instance in the somewhat ribald song in John Gay's The Beggar's Opera, which celebrates the cock before the barn door crowing, but he was never more succinctly described than in Chaucer's version of the tale of the fox and the cock whose pride in his vocalism led him almost to death. "A cock called Chanticleer in all the land for crowing had no peer. His voice was merrier than the organ gay on Mass days, which in church begins to play. For when 15 degrees had been ascended, then crew he so that it might not be amended." Traditionally, if not necessarily in ornithological science, the next daytime bird to follow the cock should be that special favorite of the poets, the skylark. The song of no other bird except the nightingale has been so persistently interpreted in terms of the human emotions it seems to express. To Shelley, the skylark was a blithe spirit, which pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art, and singing still does soar, and soaring ever singest. The lark's song was also the type of a joy purer than any a human being could know. "With thy clear, keen joyance, languor cannot be. Shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but ne'er knew love's sad satiety." Is it a mere pathetic fallacy to attribute joy to the skylark? Are birds stirred by something comparable to human emotions, or for that matter, by emotions of any kind? The question has been variously answered by poets as well as scientists. Though one does not think of Alexander Pope as a nature poet, he warned his 18th century contemporaries against thinking the earth belonged to them alone. "Is it for thee the lark ascends and sings? Joy tunes his voice, joy elevates his wings. Is it for thee the linnet pours his throat? Loves of his own and raptures swell the note." It was not a bird, but the west wind which sang in Shelley's words, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" And, according to Shakespeare, the daffodils that come before the swallow dares and take the winds of March. Nevertheless, announcing spring remains one of the bird's functions that poets have most often celebrated. From that earliest known English lyric, which begins, "Summer is a-comin' in, Luda sing cuckoo," through Edmund Spenser's "The Merry Cuckoo, Messenger of Spring," down to Wordsworth, and no doubt many a more recent poet. Nor has the fact that spring is over when the European cuckoo ceases to sing, passed unnoticed. As Matthew Arnold wrote, "So have I heard the cuckoo's parting cry, from the wet field, through the vexed garden trees, come with the volleying rain and tossing breeze. The bloom is gone, and with the bloom go I." No bird song could be shorter than the European cuckoo's, and yet none figures more often in verse or folklore. It has been said to tell the time of day, the number of years the hearer will live, and how long a girl will remain unmarried. To hear it at a wedding is a good omen, despite the seemingly contrary fact that its habit of laying its eggs in another bird's nest has made this same song a mockery of the deceived husband. This the Elizabethan audience knew so well, it could not miss the point of Shakespeare's "Cuckoo, cuckoo, O word of fear unpleasing to a married ear." Both Zeus and the Hindu god Indra took the form of a cuckoo in pursuit of amorous adventure, and the wise men of Gotham attempted to make spring last all year by shutting one up in a cage. This may be one of the reasons why cuckoo is slang for crazy. And monotonous as the song is, Beethoven chose it as the only one realistically represented in the Pastoral Symphony. None of the North American members of the cuckoo family has a song or call similar to that of its European relative. The queerest of the American cuckoos, the roadrunner of the Southwest, can give an almost dove-like coo. And can rattle his bill like this. Both the yellow-billed cuckoo of North America and his European cousin are called rain crows because they are supposed to foretell rain. But ours gives this very different call. This is the yellow-billed cuckoo. Another bird famous for his repeated insistence is the whippoorwill, which has been known to call more than 400 times at approximately 1-second intervals. Longfellow describes it in Evangeline. Loud and sudden and near, the notes of a whippoorwill sounded, like a flute in the woods, and anon through the neighboring thickets, farther and farther away it floated and dropped in silence. No family of birds is more famous for its music than the thrushes. The European song thrush, which the English call a throstle, is the subject of lilting, jingling verses by Tennyson, evidently intended to suggest the throstle's own song. Summer is coming, I know it, I know it, I know it. Light again, leaf again, life again, love again. Yes, my wild little poet, love again, song again, nest again, young again. Never a prophet so crazy, and hardly a daisy as yet, little friend. See, there is hardly a daisy. Here again, here, 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 happy year. Oh, warble unchidden, unbidden, summer is coming, my dear, and all the winters are hidden. Browning calls his English species the wise thrush, which sings each song twice over, lest you should think he never could recapture the first fine careless rapture. Our American cousin of Browning's thrush, the hermit thrush, sings the requiem over a murdered president in what may be Walt Whitman's finest poem, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Sing on, you gray-brown bird, sing from the swamps, the recesses, pour your chant from the bushes, limitless, out of the dusk, out of the cedars and pines. From deep secluded recesses, from the fragrant cedars and the ghostly pines so still, came the carol of the bird. And the charm of the carol wrapped me, as I held as if by their hands my comrades in the night, and the voice of my spirit tallied the song of the bird. Lilac and star and bird twined with the chant of my soul, there in the fragrant pines and the cedars, dusk and dim. Two other thrushes closely related to the hermit are the swainsons and the wood thrush. T.S. Eliot was obviously confusing the two when he wrote these beautiful lines, which describe the habitat not of the wood thrush, but of the swainsons. What seas, what shores, what grey rocks and what islands, what water lapping the bough and scent of pine, and the wood thrush singing through the fog. What images return, O my daughter? Here are the two songs. Swainson's thrush. Wood thrush. Throughout New England and much of the northern United States and southern Canada, the American robin, another member of the thrush family, is traditionally the herald of spring. Emily Dickinson wrote about the robin from her home in Amherst, Massachusetts. The robin is the one that interrupts the morn with hurried, few, express reports when March is scarcely on. The robin is the one that overflows the noon with her cherubic quantity, and April but begun. The robin is the one that, speechless from her nest, submits that home and certainty and sanctity are best. But for all the American robin's popularity, our best poets do not seem to have celebrated it as often as their English counterparts have celebrated their very different robin redbreast, which Wordsworth calls the bird whom man loves best, the pious bird with a scarlet breast, our little English robin, and to which Sir Walter Scott gives an eerie quality in an imitation of an ancient ballad. Proud Maisie is in the wood, walking so early. Sweet robin sits on the bush, singing so rarely. Tell me, thou bonny bird, when shall I marry me? When 6 broad gentlemen kirkward shall carry ye. The glowworm o'er grave and stone shall light thee steady. The owl from the steeple sing, welcome, proud lady. When William Blake wrote, A robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage, he was in accord with widespread folk attitudes. They reflect an especial regard for the robin and are often influenced by the belief that it is bad luck to do him any harm. The nursery rhyme, with its recurrent question, "Who killed Cock Robin?" implies guilt, and it is said that in some parts of England a boy who was known to have robbed a robin's nest would find himself surrounded by a group of his peers, pointing, hissing, and booing as a prelude to a chant, robin taker, sin, sin, sin," and "The robin and the wren are God Almighty's cock and hen, the swallow and the swift are God Almighty's gift." There are a number of similar quotations, and of course robins reciprocate with an especial concern for human beings. This they demonstrated when they covered with leaves the babes in the woods, whose story is merely the most familiar version of various tales, regularly involving this burial by robins. Here, then, is the robin's song. Next to Robin Redbreast, the wren is probably the Englishman's favorite bird. Shakespeare mentions it again and again, most notably in Macbeth. "The poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will fight, her young ones in her nest, against the owl." Blake links the wren with the robin redbreast by proclaiming, "He who shall hurt the little wren shall never be beloved by men." Here also he was echoing the folk attitude reflected in the Cornish rhyme, "Hunt a robin or a wren, never prosper boy or man." But, as all folklorists know, the sacred and the accursed are very close, and in many parts of England and the continent, the wren was traditionally and elaborately persecuted on certain occasions. In Cornwall it was the custom for everyone who possessed a gun to go out on St. Stephen's Day to shoot wrens, and in other parts of England boys carried captive wrens in procession on the day of the wren hunt. Here is the wren song. In North America, wrens certainly are favorite birds, partly because of the engaging habit of certain species, which watch birdwatchers with as much interest as birdwatchers watch them. The most familiar species is the house wren, that forbush called a bold and happy warrior. Other wrens are even finer songsters. The winter wren of our northern forests is the same species as the European wren and sings very much like it. Another example is the Carolina wren, which sounds like this. The canyon wren of the Southwest sings a descending scale, which even the least musical will remember. It goes like this. But not all wrens are musical. The cactus wren, also of the southwest, is capable of only this voluble, but certainly not musical, chatter. Longfellow gives us a collection of familiar American singers. The thrush that carols at the dawn of day from the green steeples of the piney wood, the oriole in the elm, noisy jay, jargoning like a foreigner at his food, the bluebird balanced on some topmost spray, flooding with melody the neighborhood, linnet and meadowlark, and all the throng that dwell in nests and have the gift of song. Most of these we have either heard already or will hear presently. But from this company, let us hear the eastern meadowlark. Longfellow's contemporary, Henry Thoreau, was particularly fond of another early visitor to New England, the eastern bluebird, whose arrival he celebrates thus. Warbling they swept round the distant cliff, and they warbled it over the lea, and over the blacksmith's shop in a jiff did they come warbling to me. And when Thoreau died, his friend Louisa May Alcott wrote sadly, "Spring comes to us in guise forlorn. The willow blossoms wait for him. The bluebird sings his requiem. The genius of the wood is gone." One bird commonly associated with late spring, in orchards and open country, far more brilliant in plumage than any of the birds just heard, is the Baltimore Oriole, celebrated by Emily Dickinson. Emily could hear, in a bird song, the same sounds as another listener, though only Emily seems aware of the fact that the sweetness of a song, like the wit of a jest, lies in the ear of him who hears it. To hear an oriole sing may be a common thing or only a divine. So whether it be rune or whether it be none is of within. The tune is in the tree, the skeptic showeth me. No, sir, in thee. Now let each of us decide for himself whether to hear an oriole sing is a common thing or only a divine. Henry Thoreau was a faithful recorder of the passing seasons. Though he may have been particularly fond of the bluebird that heralds the spring, he also found music in the monotonous song of a latecomer, the red-eyed vireo, which arrives when the trees are in leaf. Upon the leafy elm tree sprays the vireo rings his changes sweet. Though Thoreau appreciated the song of the red-eyed vireo, he must have loved especially the sweet descending note of that thrush of the deep woods, the veery, for he devotes to it a whole poem with a characteristic twist at the end. When breathless noon hath paused on hill and vale, and now no more the woodman plies his axe, nor mower whets his scythe, somewhat it is, sole sojourner on earth, to hear the veery on her oaken perch ringing her modest trill. One common summer bird Thoreau does not mention is the ovenbird, and it is doubtful that he ever connected its striking call with the inconspicuous, shy creature that utters it. Robert Frost supplies this deficiency by his tribute, called simply The Ovenbird. It begins, "There is a singer everyone has heard, loud, a midsummer and a midwood bird, who makes the solid tree trunks sound again." Neither the melancholy pewee nor the cheerful chickadee can be said actually to sing, but each contributes to the melody of earth, and each has won the attention of poets. John Townsend Trowbridge salutes the eastern wood pewee thus: "Dear bird," I said, "what is thy name?" And thrice the mournful answer came, so faint and far, and yet so near, "Pewee, pewee, peer." The black-capped chickadee is a bird for all seasons. Emerson called it a titmouse, but there is no mistaking the bird he is referring to when he says, "Gay and polite, a cheerful cry, chick-chickadee-dee, saucy note, out of a sound heart and merry throat, as if it said, 'Good day, good sir, fine afternoon, old passenger, happy to meet you in these places where January brings few faces.'" Mark Van Doren is more specific. "The chickadee has 3 short songs to love the world with, spring and fall and winter, for he loves them all. And 2 of them are cherry sweet, but one is diligent persimmon. Children love the last, and women." Here, then, are the songs of the black-capped chickadee. No American bird is more discreetly beautiful than the cedar waxwing. "Neat but not gaudy" is its motto, and when a flock turns up unexpectedly for a few days, that is a real event. William Matchett, a contemporary poet, describes the cedar waxwing thus: "Drunk on sour cherries, the harlequin of birds lurches through the branches and lisps in bleared content, while a Temperance Union catbird shrieks her words in a scathing, scolding lecture he's too happy to resent." Another famous American singer, the yellowthroat, was celebrated thus by Henry Van Dyke: "I hear a voice that seems to say, now near at hand, now far away, 'Witchery, witchery, witchery.' There's magic in that small bird's note. See, there he flits, the yellowthroat, a living sunbeam tipped with wings, a spark of light that sings and sings, 'Witchery, witchery, witchery.'" Still another, the bobolink, received from William Cullen Bryant, a tribute recited from 1,000 little red schoolhouses on Friday afternoons. "Merrily swinging on briar and weed, near to the nest of his little dame, over the mountainside or mead, Robert of Lincoln is telling his name. Bobolink, bobolink, spink, spank, spink, snug and safe is that nest of ours, hidden among the summer flowers, chee-chee-chee." Walt Whitman's poems are full of references to both land and water birds that he watched and listened to with delight during his summers on Long Island. The bobwhite quail, whistling betwixt the woods and the wheat lot. Whitman spoke also of the hummingbird, and the neck of the long-lived swan. the laughing gull which scoots by the shore where she laughs her near-human laugh. Another favourite, the mockingbird, Whitman celebrated at length in Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. Once Pomanic, when the lilac scent was in the air and fifth-month grass was growing. Up this seashore, in some briars, 2 feathered guests from Alabama, 2 together, and their nest, and 4 light green eggs spotted with brown. And every day the he-bird, to and fro, near at hand, and every day the she-bird crouched on her nest, silent with bright eyes. One forenoon the she-bird crouched not on the nest, nor returned that afternoon, nor the next, nor ever appeared again. And thenceforward, all summer, in the sound of the sea, and at night, under the full of the moon in calmer weather, over the hoarse surging of the sea, or flitting from briar to briar by day, I heard at intervals the remaining one, the he-bird, the solitary guest from Alabama. Nevermore shall I escape, nevermore the reverberations, nevermore the cries of unsatisfied love be absent from me. Crows, ravens, rooks, and jackdaws all belong to the same unmusical genus. They call and they squawk. Some can even be taught to say a few words, but none of them sings. Nevertheless, they figure more largely in literature than most of the more melodious creatures. That, no doubt, is because they are intelligent, mischievous, ominously black, and because they boldly cry what sounds like derisive defiance at the human beings who disturb them. Their black robe suggests mourning, but they are far from being mourning birds. And, of course, the common raven in North America is both sinister and melancholy throughout that best known of all American poems about a bird, Once Upon a Midnight Dreary. According to Poe's own, but not necessarily veracious account, he planned the melodramatic effects of the poem with cold-blooded rationality and chose a raven rather than the parrot he had first considered, for the obvious reason that parrots are comic and ravens are sinister. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Ravens appear in the folklore of most Eurasian people and also in that of the American Indian. Sometimes they are birds of ill omen, as in Poe, but at others they are benevolent. It was a raven that fed Elijah, and a raven that Noah sent as a messenger. According to the book of Job, God feeds the young ravens, and in more recent times a raven was the constant companion of Dickens's Barnaby Rudge. Once at least the jackdaw was praised as wise, when William Cowper translated thus the Latin of an English schoolmaster. There is a bird who by his coat and by the hoarseness of his note might be supposed a crow, a great frequenter of the church, where, bishop-like, he finds a perch and dormitory too. He sees that this great roundabout, the world, with all its motley rout, church, army, physic, law, its customs, and its businesses, is no concern at all of his, and says, what says he? Caw. Thrice happy bird, I too have seen much of the vanities of men, and sick of having seen 'em, would cheerfully these limbs resign for such a pair of wings as thine, and such a head between 'em. Here is how some members of this unmusical genus really sound. The American crow, the American raven, the English rook, the jackdaw, Very different from these harsh notes is what Tennyson calls the moan of doves in immemorial elms. Though he is doubtless referring to the English wood pigeon, he might equally well be writing about our American mourning dove, or, for that matter, about the turtle dove in the Song of Solomon. The voice of the turtle is heard in our land. Here, for comparison, are the songs of the three birds. First, the song of the wood pigeon, which, long ago, my father told me, says, "Take 2 coos, Taffy." The song of the wood pigeon. The song of the mourning dove. The song of the turtle dove. There are, on the other hand, a few bird cries which suggest neither the domestic, the reassuring, nor even the human, but rather that ultimate wildness which haunted the imagination of Thoreau. Thoreau was indulging in no more than a permissible exaggeration when he wrote in Walden, "The wild goose is more of a cosmopolite than we. He breaks his fast in Canada, takes a luncheon in the Ohio, and plumes himself for the night in a southern bayou." In actual fact, the Canada goose does breed as far north as the Yukon, and he winters all the way from British Columbia to Florida and southern California. The familiar saying, "the goose hangs high," is probably a corruption of honks high, which is supposed to be a sign of fair weather. In any case, to see an ordered flock borne north or south on great tireless wing beats is one of the most awesome sights in nature. Anything as frivolous as a song would be incongruous, but the honk sounds suitably ancient, wild, confident, and mysterious. Thus, even before the English language had been formed, the anonymous Anglo-Saxon poet who wrote The Seafarer celebrated the wildness of the seabirds in lines which translate thus: "The sea-mew's call, the scream of the gannet, the shriek of the gull." Tennyson calls upon one of them to supply the atmosphere of the narrative when he begins, "'Tis the place and all around it, as of old the curlews call, dreary gleams about the moorland, flying over Locksley Hall." Of all American birds, the loon, wrote Edward Howe Forbush, seems best to typify the stark wildness of primeval nature. Whittier refers to the loon's weird laughter far away. Paul Brooks describes its familiar and unforgettable call, the purest voice of the North Country, the wild, unearthly cry of the loon, pulsating through the darkness like northern lights through a night sky. And now we come at last to the most famous songbird in all English literature, the nightingale. No other bird of the thousands of species enumerated by ornithologists has ever been celebrated so often, so ecstatically, by so many of the most eminent poets, or in words which attribute to its song so much emotion interpretable in human terms. Keats hears the nightingale as the singer whose song found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. And a very different poet, T.S. Eliot, when describing his wasteland, confesses, "Yet there the nightingale filled all the desert with inviolable voice." Wordsworth exclaims, "O nightingale, thou surely art a creature of a fiery heart." For Swinburne it is the brown, bright nightingale amorous. And to Matthew Arnold it sings of eternal passion, eternal pain. Perhaps the best, as well as the best-known poem on the nightingale, is Keats' famous ode. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The same that oft-times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep?